A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
I was looking at some of the data from the latest World Happiness Report that came out last year, and it is honestly jarring to see the divergence between how much money a country has and how satisfied the people actually feel. We are sitting here in March of 2026, and the conversation around national success is shifting so fast it is hard to keep up. Today's prompt from Daniel is about the Beyond Gross Domestic Product movement and these national happiness rankings, and it really makes you wonder if we have been using the wrong scorecard for the last century.
Herman Poppleberry here, and I have been diving deep into the methodology of that 2025 report and the recent updates from the United Nations. It is fascinating because for decades, we treated gross domestic product as the ultimate proxy for human progress. If the line goes up, life is getting better. But the data Daniel is pointing us towards suggests that the line can go up while the people feel like they are drowning. The United States is the perfect example of this. We have the highest nominal gross domestic product in the world, yet in the 2025 rankings we slipped again, down to 24th place. Meanwhile, you have a country like Costa Rica leaping into the top 10, specifically number 6, despite having a fraction of our wealth.
It is the ultimate paradox. We are richer than ever in terms of raw numbers, yet we are seeing this measurable decline in well-being, especially among younger people. I want to dig into what these researchers are actually measuring, because happiness sounds so subjective. How do you turn a feeling into a hard metric that a government can actually use to set policy? It feels like trying to nail jelly to a wall.
That is where the Cantrell ladder comes in. It is the primary tool used by researchers like John Helliwell and Jeffrey Sachs. Instead of asking people if they had a good day or if they are smiling, which is fleeting and mood dependent, they ask them to imagine a ladder with steps from 0 to 10. 10 is the best possible life for you, and 0 is the worst. You rate where you stand on that ladder right now. When you aggregate those scores over a 3-year rolling period, you get a remarkably stable picture of national well-being. It filters out the noise of a single bad week or a temporary celebration.
So it is more about life satisfaction than just a mood. But they do not just stop at the ranking, right? They try to explain why Finland has been number 1 for 8 years straight, while other wealthy nations are stalling. What are the actual levers they are looking at?
There are 6 key variables that explain about 3/4 of the variation between countries. You have gross domestic product per capita, which still matters because you need a baseline of material security. Then you have social support, healthy life expectancy, freedom to make life choices, generosity, and perceptions of corruption. The January 2026 report from the United Nations High-Level Expert Group really doubled down on these. They are pushing for 30 universal indicators to complement gross domestic product because they realize that if you only measure output, you ignore the depreciation of human and social capital. They want to track things like the quality of work, environmental health, and even the strength of local communities.
That social support piece feels like the secret sauce. I noticed in the 2025 data that Israel ranked 8th globally, which is wild when you consider the sheer amount of stress and conflict that country has endured recently. You would expect the numbers to crater, but they stayed in the top 10. What is the mechanism there? How does a country under that kind of pressure stay happier than, say, Canada or Germany?
The Israel paradox is one of the most studied phenomena in this field. Even though the 2025 ranking dropped slightly from 5th to 8th because it started incorporating post-October 7th sentiment, the underlying social fabric remains incredibly resilient. The standout statistic for me was that young Israelis rate social support higher than youth in almost any other country. When you are in a high-threat environment, it tends to force a level of community solidarity and family cohesion that wealthier, more peaceful nations often lose. You see people showing up for each other in ways that are mathematically measurable. It is about having someone to count on in times of trouble, which is a specific question in the survey.
It reminds me of what we talked about in episode 548 regarding the high price of security. There is this sense of shared destiny. If you feel like your neighbor has your back and the state will catch you if you fall, your baseline anxiety drops even if the external world is chaotic. It is almost like high-trust environments act as a shock absorber for the soul. But how does that compare to the Nordic model? Because Finland and Denmark do not exactly have the same external threats as Israel.
In the Nordic countries, it is institutional trust. You believe the government is not corrupt and that the system is fair. There is also a cultural component called janteloven, or the law of Jante. It is this cultural emphasis on equality and modesty. It basically says you are not better than anyone else. While that might sound stifling to an American individualist, it actually reduces the stress of social competition. You do not have this constant pressure to outdo your neighbor because the society values the collective well-being over individual stardom. They have essentially engineered a high-floor society where nobody falls too far.
That is a fascinating contrast to the Latin America effect. We saw Mexico jump from 25th to 10th place in the latest report, and Costa Rica is now at number 6. They do not have the same institutional safety net as Finland, and they do not have the same security environment as Israel. So what is driving their surge?
Researchers point to social structure and cultural orientation. In Mexico and Costa Rica, you have these massive multi-generational households and a cultural emphasis on social bonding. They have very high scores in the generosity and social support categories. There is a cultural orientation toward the present moment and shared joy, what the Costa Ricans call pura vida. It is not just a slogan for tourists. It is a way of life that prioritizes relationships over the accumulation of things. Even when economic conditions are tough, the social buffer is so thick that people do not feel the same level of isolation that we see in the United States.
And Costa Rica has that incredible historical backstory. They are the first non-European country to break into that top tier in a long time. And their story goes back to 1949 when they literally abolished their military. I mean, they just stopped spending money on defense entirely.
That is one of the most successful long-term policy bets in history. They took the money that would have gone into tanks and fighter jets and poured it into universal health care, education, and environmental protection. They have essentially been reinvesting their security budget into human well-being for over 70 years. Now, they have a higher life expectancy than the United States and a population that overwhelmingly reports high life satisfaction despite having less than half the wealth per person. It is a complete inversion of the guns versus butter debate. They chose the butter, and it turned out to be a massive economic and social dividend.
It makes you look at the United States decline through a different lens. We are falling to 24th, and the data shows it is mostly a story about people under 30. If you only looked at Americans over 60, we would still be in the top 10. But the younger generations are reporting levels of loneliness and dissatisfaction that are dragging the whole country down. It feels like we've optimized for individual productivity and digital consumption at the expense of actual human connection.
The data supports that. Social media, the decline of third places like community centers and churches, and the sheer cost of housing have created a sense of precarity. When you look at the United Nations push for beyond gross domestic product metrics, they are looking at things like the quality of work and social capital. We are seeing a shift in the global conversation where leaders are realizing that a high gross domestic product does not mean much if your citizens are having a mental health crisis. The United Nations High-Level Expert Group is proposing 30 indicators that include things like the gender pay gap, access to green space, and the level of trust in the police.
I love the idea of a well-being budget, like what New Zealand started doing under Jacinda Ardern back in 2019. They actually started allocating funds based on how much a project would improve mental health or child poverty, rather than just how much it would add to the bottom line. It seems like such a common sense approach, but it is radical when you realize how much our current systems are blinded by pure numbers.
It is about moving from a world of how much to a world of how well. The OECD Better Life Index has been tracking this for a while, looking at 11 different dimensions including work-life balance and civic engagement. What is interesting is that when you start measuring these things, the policy solutions change. Instead of just focusing on tax breaks for big corporations, you might focus on zoning laws that allow for walkable neighborhoods, because we know that walking and seeing your neighbors increases happiness.
We touched on that in episode 572, how zoning and policy shape our cities. If you design a city where everyone is trapped in a car for 2 hours a day, you are essentially engineering unhappiness into the system, regardless of how high the salaries are. It is a hidden tax on well-being that gross domestic product never accounts for. In fact, gross domestic product actually counts the negative as a positive in many cases.
If there is a massive car pileup on the highway, gross domestic product goes up because of the hospital bills, the tow trucks, and the new car sales. If you have a spike in crime and have to build more prisons, gross domestic product goes up. It is a metric that can grow through human misery. That is why the move toward the 30 universal indicators proposed by the United Nations is so important. They want to track things like environmental quality and subjective well-being, so we can stop pretending that all growth is good growth. They are looking at the depreciation of natural capital. Like if you cut down a forest, your gross domestic product goes up from the timber sales, but your national wealth actually goes down because you lost the ecosystem services.
So if someone is listening to this and feeling like they are stuck in one of those declining countries, what is the takeaway? We cannot all just move to Finland or Costa Rica. Is there a way to apply these happiness variables at a local or personal level?
The research suggests that 60 to 70% of the differences in happiness between individuals are environmental and social. Only about 30 to 40% is genetic. That means you have a lot of agency. The biggest thing you can do is invest in your local social capital. The 2025 report found that the belief in the kindness of strangers is actually a stronger predictor of happiness than income level. If you believe that if you lost your wallet in the street, a stranger would return it, your life satisfaction is significantly higher.
That is incredible. Finland actually does lost wallet tests, right?
They do. In Helsinki, they dropped 12 wallets with cash and a phone number inside. 11 out of 12 were returned with the money still there. That level of social trust is what creates the foundation for happiness. It starts at the neighborhood level. It is about volunteering, knowing your neighbors, and creating those small face-to-face support networks that the data says are more valuable than a raise. It is about building your own little pocket of Finland wherever you are.
I think about the Israel example again. Even in the middle of a conflict, that sense of community is what keeps the ladder score high. It is a reminder that we are social animals first, and economic units second. If you ignore the social animal, the economic unit eventually breaks down anyway. We saw that in the productivity paradox we discussed in episode 1240. Countries that work fewer hours, like Germany or Denmark, often have higher productivity per hour and higher happiness scores.
They have realized that rest and social time are not just luxuries, they are the fuel for a functioning society. The United States is currently stuck in this cycle of working more to buy more things to compensate for the fact that we are too tired to see our friends. It is a treadmill that goes nowhere. But the momentum for change is definitely there. The United Nations High-Level Expert Group is working on a framework that would essentially force member states to report on these well-being metrics alongside their economic data. It is a way of holding governments accountable for the actual lived experience of their citizens.
Imagine a world where a politician is judged not just on the unemployment rate, but on the national loneliness rate, or the level of trust in the community. That would change the entire nature of political campaigning. Instead of arguing about decimal points of growth, they would have to argue about who has a better plan for mental health and community resilience. It brings it back to the human scale.
It also highlights the importance of institutional integrity. One of the reasons the Nordic countries stay at the top is that they have incredibly low levels of perceived corruption. When people feel like the game is rigged, their happiness plummets. In the 2025 report, perceptions of corruption were a massive drag on the scores of many developing nations. If you want a happy country, you have to start with an honest government. It is not just about being nice, it is about being fair.
And that is a hard one to fix overnight. But the generosity piece is something anyone can start tomorrow. The fact that pro-social behavior like donating and volunteering is such a strong, independent predictor of happiness is so empowering. It means that by helping others, you are literally hacking your own well-being. It is a positive-sum game. The 2025 report's theme was actually the impact of caring and sharing.
They found that during the pandemic, there was a global surge in people helping strangers, and that actually helped mitigate the decline in happiness that you would expect during a global crisis. We have this deep-seated need to be useful to each other. When we lean into that, the rankings reflect it. It is what the researchers call the helper's high. It is a biological and social reality that we are at our best when we are looking out for someone else.
It makes me think about the future of this movement. If we actually move beyond gross domestic product, do we run the risk of governments becoming too paternalistic? Like, if they are trying to engineer our happiness, does that lead to a kind of Brave New World scenario where freedom is sacrificed for a high score on the Cantrell ladder?
That is a valid concern, but the framework actually includes freedom to make life choices as one of the 6 key variables. You cannot have a high happiness score in a society where people feel coerced or restricted. The goal is not to force people to be happy, but to remove the structural barriers that make them miserable. It is about creating the conditions where happiness is possible, like having access to healthcare, a safe neighborhood, and a fair job market. It is about providing the foundation, not building the whole house for you.
I think that is a distinction that would resonate with a lot of people. It is the difference between the government giving you a pill to make you happy, and the government making sure the air is clean and the streets are safe, so you can go for a walk and feel good on your own. It is about flourishing, right? Like the Greek concept of eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia is more about living a life of purpose and excellence than just feeling good. That is what these metrics are trying to capture. Are you living a life that feels meaningful? Do you have the support you need to pursue your goals? When you look at it that way, it is a very universal idea. It is about strong families, strong communities, and a government that stays out of the way of human connection while protecting the basics.
It is a fascinating shift in perspective. I think we've spent so much time focusing on the machinery of prosperity that we forgot what the prosperity was for. We built this incredible engine, and now we are realizing we need to check the dashboard to see if the passengers are actually enjoying the ride. The dashboard is telling us that we need to pull over and look at the map.
And the Beyond Gross Domestic Product movement is that map. It is a way of saying that we have the wealth, now we need to figure out how to turn that wealth into well-being. Countries like Costa Rica and Finland are showing us that it is possible even if their methods are different. One uses institutional trust and a massive safety net. The other uses social cohesion and a historic reallocation of military funds. Both paths lead to the same result, a population that feels their life is worth living.
It is a hopeful note to end on. If a country can stay in the top 10 of happiness while literally being at war, like Israel, then we really do not have an excuse for being this miserable in peace and plenty. It shows that the human spirit is incredibly resilient if it has the right social support. We are moving from a world of how much to a world of how well, and I think that is a transition that is long overdue.
It really does. The data is there, the framework is being built by the United Nations, and the examples are all around us. It is just a matter of changing what we value.
Well, I think that is a good place to wrap this one up. We have covered a lot of ground, from the Cantrell ladder to the Israel paradox and the rise of Costa Rica. It is a lot to think about the next time you see those gross domestic product numbers in the news.
It certainly is. There is a whole world of data out there that tells a much more human story if you know where to look.
Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show and allow us to dive into these deep topics every week.
If you enjoyed this exploration of happiness and national metrics, we would love for you to leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps other curious minds find the show.
This has been My Weird Prompts. You can find us at myweirdprompts.com for the full archive and all the ways to subscribe. We will be back soon with another deep dive.
See you then.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the close from sloth